The opulent chandeliers glimmered above white linen-covered tables, each adorned with elegant arrangements of fresh orchids. Waiters in impeccably tailored black suits glided across the room, carrying trays laden with artisanal delicacies. Chez Lumiere, the most prestigious restaurant in Beverly Hills, was known for its exclusivity and its clientele of Hollywood's elite. Tonight was no exception, except that among the dazzling crowd of celebrities, tycoons, and socialites, a scruffy, disheveled man with matted hair and tattered clothes sat in a dark corner, hunched over as if trying to blend into the shadowy wallpaper. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. Few would have guessed that the man was none other than Johnny Depp. He had chosen this peculiar disguise as part of an elaborate experiment. For years, Johnny had grown weary of the public's perception of him. The media painted him as either a larger-than-life star or a tabloid caricature. The real Johnny, a curious, compassionate man with a flair for the unconventional, felt lost beneath the mask of fame. Tonight, he was determined to see the world from a different vantage point, one stripped of his usual adoration. What better way to do that than to infiltrate the world's most glamorous restaurant as someone society often overlooks? A homeless man? Johnny's transformation had been meticulous. Renowned makeup artist Joel Harlow had spent hours crafting a visage of poverty, deeply etched wrinkles, sun-weathered skin, a faint scar running from his cheekbone to his chin. They'd even added prosthetic teeth, yellowed and chipped, to complete the illusion. His clothes, a mismatched patchwork of old flannel, fraying denim, and an oversized trench coat, reeked of mildew and decay, thanks to a carefully concocted spray from the props department. As Johnny shuffled into the restaurant, heads turned, noses wrinkling in disapproval. The maitre d', a man named Pierre with a pencil-thin mustache, rushed forward, blocking his path with an outstretched arm. "Excuse me, sir," Pierre said, his tone icy. "You appear to be lost. We do not serve—" He paused, as if searching for the right euphemism. "Uninvited guests." Johnny raised his hands defensively, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he rasped. "I just want a glass of water. Maybe some bread if you got extra." Pierre's mouth twisted into a sneer, but before he could respond, a soft voice interrupted. "Pierre, is there a problem?" It was Madame Lumiere herself, the elegant Frenchwoman who owned the restaurant. Clad in a sleek black dress and dripping with pearls, she exuded an air of authority. "This man, madame," Pierre began, he's a guest." She cut him off firmly, her dark eyes locking with Johnny's. "Every soul deserves a moment of dignity. Show him to a table." Pierre's jaw tightened, but he relented, gesturing toward the least conspicuous table in the restaurant. Johnny shuffled past him, murmuring his thanks to Madame Lumiere. As he settled into the chair, the weight of the room's judgment bore down on him. The first 20 minutes were excruciating. Diners whispered behind their menus, stealing sideways glances at the intruder. A particularly snobbish woman at a nearby table leaned toward her companion, hissing, "How did security let him in? It's unsanitary!" Her words stung, but Johnny maintained his stoic demeanor, his eyes scanning the room. He wanted to see who would reveal their true character in the presence of someone deemed lesser. Then something unexpected happened. A waiter, a young man with kind eyes and an air of quiet defiance, approached Johnny's table. Instead of offering a dismissive gesture or a curt remark, he placed a steaming bowl of soup and a crusty loaf of bread in front of him. "Compliments of the chef," the waiter whispered, winking before disappearing into the kitchen. Johnny was taken aback. He hadn't ordered anything, and this act of kindness felt like a crack in the otherwise cold facade of the restaurant. He savored the soup, its warmth cutting through the chill of the room's disdain. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere shifted. A man at a corner table, who had previously been engrossed in his phone, stood up and walked over. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his silver hair slicked back with precision. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. Johnny gestured to the empty chair. The man introduced himself as Charles Kensington, a venture capitalist known for his philanthropy. "I don't usually see someone like you here," Charles said, his tone neutral but probing. "What brings you to Chez Lumiere?" Johnny's lips twitched in a wry smile. "Curiosity," he replied cryptically. Charles chuckled, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. For a moment, Johnny wondered if his disguise had been too thin. Before they could delve further, the sound of raised voices drew their attention. A young woman, dressed in a sleek gold gown, was standing by the bar, arguing with Pierre. From their heated exchange, it became clear that she had requested to pay for the mysterious man's meal and had been refused. "This isn't your business, miss," Pierre insisted, his voice tinged with irritation. "It is if you're treating someone unfairly," she shot back, her cheeks flushed with indignation. Johnny watched, both amused and moved. He hadn't anticipated such fervent advocacy from a stranger. Before the argument could escalate further, Madame Lumiere intervened once again, calming the situation with her measured poise. "Let her pay if she wishes," she said simply. The woman approached Johnny's table, a triumphant smile lighting up her face. "My name's Isabel," she said, extending her hand. "You deserve better than the scraps they've given you tonight." Johnny took her hand, her warmth starkly contrasting the restaurant's chilly ambiance. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft with genuine gratitude. The night continued to unravel in surprising ways. Isabel stayed by Johnny's side, engaging him in conversation that meandered through philosophy, art, and the human condition. Charles, too, lingered, sharing stories of his travels and the lessons he'd learned along the way. Soon, their table drew attention, and others began to approach, curiosity overcoming their initial judgment. By the time dessert was served, a delicate souffle that Johnny marveled at for its sheer audacity, the room's energy had transformed. What had begun as a spectacle of discomfort and disdain had become a gathering of open minds and unexpected connections. Then, with a dramatic flourish, Johnny stood, raising his glass of water in a toast. "To the courage it takes to see beyond appearances," he declared, his voice resonating with the charisma that had once captivated millions. In that moment, a ripple of realization spread through the crowd. Gasps echoed as recognition dawned on faces. Johnny Depp, the enigmatic actor, had been among them all along, disguised as someone society often disregards. Chaos ensued as diners clamored for explanations, photos, and autographs, but Johnny held up a hand, silencing the room. "This wasn't a stunt," he said, his tone serious. "It was a lesson. Tonight, you've all shown me how much kindness and cruelty coexist in the same space. Remember, every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Treat them with dignity." The room erupted into applause, a standing ovation that felt as much a reflection of their own growth as a tribute to Johnny's words. As the night wound down, Johnny slipped out through the kitchen, avoiding the paparazzi that had begun to gather outside. He left behind more than just an unforgettable evening. He left a challenge to everyone who had witnessed the evening's events, to look beyond the surface, to act with compassion, and to embrace the unexpected connections that life offers. Chez Lumiere was never the same after that night. The story of Johnny Depp's experiment spread far and wide, becoming a legend of its own. The restaurant, once known for its exclusivity, earned a new reputation as a place where humanity and humility were just as important as haute cuisine, and Johnny, for his part, returned to his life with a renewed sense of purpose, his experiment a resounding success. The next morning, the internet buzzed with stories about the extraordinary events at Chez Lumiere. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags like #JohnnyUnmasked and #KindnessExperiment as attendees posted photos and recounted their encounters. Headlines in entertainment and lifestyle blogs read, "Johnny Depp's most unpredictable role yet, a homeless man in Beverly Hills." For weeks, the story dominated conversations, igniting debates about privilege, empathy, and the nature of human kindness. Johnny, however, was nowhere to be found. After slipping out of the restaurant, he retreated to his private villa tucked away in the Hollywood Hills, a haven of tranquility where he could reflect on the night. He kept the disguise, hanging it in a corner of his vast walk-in wardrobe, a poignant reminder of the truths he'd uncovered. Though the applause and adoration had returned, Johnny wasn't interested in basking in his success. He was preoccupied with a deeper question. How could he channel the revelations from that night into something meaningful? Chez Lumiere, too, was undergoing a transformation. Madame Lumiere, deeply moved by Johnny's experiment, decided to implement changes that would challenge the exclusivity that had defined her restaurant for decades. In collaboration with local nonprofits, she introduced a program called Tables of Grace, reserving a portion of the restaurant's tables each week for individuals experiencing homelessness. The initiative wasn't just about offering a free meal, it was about fostering a sense of dignity and inclusion. The first Tables of Grace night drew mixed reactions. Regular patrons voiced concerns about maintaining the restaurant's image, while others lauded Madame Lumiere's bold stance. When the night arrived, it was both a celebration and a challenge. Guests from vastly different walks of life shared tables, awkward silences giving way to tentative conversations. Stories were exchanged over foie gras and truffle risotto, bridging divides that had seemed insurmountable. Reporters swarmed the restaurant, eager to capture the revolutionary shift. One headline read, "Where Haute Cuisine Meets Humanity, the Chez Lumiere Experiment." Johnny, watching from the sidelines, felt a flicker of hope. His small act of defiance had sparked something greater than he'd anticipated. For Johnny, this was only the beginning. He began working quietly with advocacy groups, lending his star power to initiatives aimed at combating homelessness. His involvement wasn't just performative. Johnny dove deep into the issue, meeting with individuals who had experienced homelessness, listening to their stories, and learning about the systemic challenges they faced. One such individual was a man named Marcus, whom Johnny met at a shelter in downtown Los Angeles. Marcus had once been a successful architect, but a series of misfortunes, job loss, a health crisis, and the breakdown of his marriage had left him on the streets. His story was a stark reminder of how quickly life's circumstances could change, even for those who seemed to have it all. Johnny and Marcus formed an unlikely friendship. Over countless cups of coffee in shabby diners, Marcus shared his dream of designing spaces that could serve as transitional housing for people experiencing homelessness. Johnny, inspired by Marcus's vision, decided to help bring it to life. Together, they began working on a project called Haven, a network of small, sustainable housing communities designed to provide not just shelter, but also a sense of belonging and support. Word of Johnny's involvement in the Haven project spread, drawing support from other celebrities, philanthropists, and even city officials. Suddenly, the conversation around homelessness in Los Angeles was shifting. What had once been a problem relegated to the fringes of society was now a topic of mainstream discourse. At one of Haven's groundbreaking ceremonies, Johnny spoke candidly to a crowd of reporters and supporters. "Homelessness isn't just a lack of a roof over someone's head," he said, his voice steady and impassioned. "It's a lack of community, of hope, of opportunity. If we have the resources to dine in luxury, we also have the resources to ensure that no one is left behind." His words struck a chord. Donations poured in, and the project gained momentum. Soon, the first Haven community opened its doors, providing housing, counseling, and job training to its residents. Marcus, standing beside Johnny at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, couldn't hide his tears. "This isn't just a building," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a chance for people to reclaim their lives." Back at Chez Lumiere, the ripple effects of Johnny's experiment were still unfolding. The young waiter who had brought Johnny the bowl of soup, whose name was Ethan, found himself at the center of media attention. His small act of kindness had not gone unnoticed, and he quickly became a symbol of quiet heroism. Ethan, who had been working at the restaurant to save money for culinary school, was offered a scholarship by a prominent chef who had heard his story. Overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, Ethan decided to use his newfound platform to advocate for fair treatment of service industry workers, many of whom were living paycheck to paycheck. Isabel, the woman in the gold gown who had stood up to Pierre, also experienced a life-changing shift. Her fiery defense of Johnny had inspired her to take a closer look at her own life. A successful fashion designer, Isabel realized she could use her platform to promote inclusivity and social justice. She began a new clothing line, Empathy Couture, which employed individuals from marginalized communities and donated a portion of its proceeds to housing initiatives. Even Charles Kensington, the venture capitalist who had shared Johnny's table that fateful night, found himself reevaluating his priorities. Known for his investments in luxury real estate, Charles began shifting his focus toward projects that prioritized affordable housing and community development. Months later, Johnny felt the itch to conduct another experiment. This time, he wanted to explore a different environment, one far removed from the polished elegance of Chez Lumiere. Disguising himself once again, he wandered into a rundown diner on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The patrons here were working-class families, truck drivers, and elderly regulars nursing cups of black coffee. Despite his appearance, the reception was markedly different from his experience at Chez Lumiere. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes but a warm smile, greeted him with a cheery, "What can I get you, hun?" A man at the counter struck up a conversation, sharing stories of his years on the road as a long haul trucker. Johnny was struck by the sense of community, the lack of pretense, and the genuine kindness that flowed through the room. It was a stark contrast to the cold, judgmental stares he'd encountered at the upscale restaurant. When he revealed his true identity at the end of the meal, the reaction was one of laughter and disbelief, followed by an outpouring of warmth. "Well, I'll be damned," the waitress said, shaking her head with a grin. "You're a lot shorter in person." This second experiment reaffirmed what Johnny had begun to understand, that true wealth wasn't measured in material possessions or social status, but in the depth of human connection. Johnny's experiment at Chez Lumiere had sparked a movement that extended far beyond the restaurant's gilded walls. Discussions about empathy, privilege, and systemic inequality became more prominent in Hollywood and beyond. Celebrities began using their platforms to highlight social issues, while restaurants and businesses across the country adopted similar Tables of Grace programs. For Johnny, the experience was transformative. He continued to act, but his projects became increasingly aligned with his values. He took on roles that highlighted social issues, using his art to challenge societal norms and provoke thought. His journey wasn't without its critics. Some accused him of using his fame to stage self-serving publicity stunts, but Johnny paid them little mind. He knew that change rarely came without controversy, and he was prepared to face the backlash if it meant shining a light on issues that mattered. One evening, as he sat on the porch of his villa, strumming a guitar and reflecting on the path his life had taken, he received a letter. It was from a man named Javier, who had been one of the first residents of the Haven community. "I just wanted to thank you," the letter read. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm part of something, like I matter. And that's because you cared enough to see me, not just look at me. I'll never forget that." Johnny folded the letter carefully, his heart full. The night Johnny Depp walked into Chez Lumiere as a homeless man was a turning point, not just for him, but for everyone who witnessed it. It served as a stark reminder that beneath the layers of societal judgment and preconceived notions, there lies a shared humanity. The world may not have changed overnight, but it was moments like these that planted the seeds of transformation. Johnny's journey from a Hollywood icon to an advocate for empathy proved that even the smallest gestures could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that were profound and enduring. And so, the story of Johnny Depp's incredible experiment became a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of compassion, and a call to action for a world that often forgets to look beyond the surface. As the story of Johnny Depp's bold social experiment spread beyond the borders of the United States, it ignited conversations around the world. In Europe, prestigious newspapers like The Guardian and Le Monde ran thoughtful op-eds about the intersections of wealth, privilege, and homelessness. In Asia, the experiment inspired cultural debates about honor and shame, with commentators reflecting on how societal expectations often pressure people to prioritize appearances over compassion. Even in countries grappling with their own severe poverty crises, the tale struck a chord, shedding light on how universal the need for dignity truly is. Social media further amplified the global impact. Videos of Johnny's speech at Chez Lumiere were translated into dozens of languages and circulated widely. Hashtags like #SeeTheInvisible and #DeppExperiment trended across continents, uniting people in discussions about the everyday invisibility of marginalized groups. Many shared their personal stories, recounting moments when they had been dismissed or disregarded based on how they looked, spoke, or dressed. Others pledged to approach their interactions with strangers differently, resolving to practice empathy more actively. Perhaps the most heartwarming aspect of the global reaction was the outpouring of grassroots initiatives sparked by Johnny's actions. In Berlin, an upscale cafe started offering invisible tables, where guests could anonymously pay for meals for those in need. In Mumbai, a popular filmmaker launched a short film competition challenging young directors to explore themes of social inequality. In Sydney, a community theater group staged a play based on the Chez Lumiere story, blending humor and poignancy to remind audiences of the humanity behind every face. The entertainment industry itself was not immune to the ripple effects of Johnny's experiment. It forced a reckoning within Hollywood, an industry often accused of glamorizing wealth while overlooking the harsh realities of poverty. producers, screenwriters, and directors began to realize that they had a unique opportunity and responsibility to reshape public narratives. Studios that once prioritized blockbusters and glossy escapism began greenlighting projects with more socially conscious themes. A surge of films, television series, and documentaries exploring homelessness, inequality, and systemic barriers emerged, all striving to humanize those who had long been rendered invisible by society. Critics lauded this shift as a refreshing departure from Hollywood's usual fare, and audiences responded enthusiastically, flocking to cinemas and streaming platforms to engage with these stories. One particularly notable film was Beyond the Mask, a drama loosely inspired by Johnny's Night at Chez Lumière. Directed by an independent filmmaker and starring a diverse cast of newcomers, the movie followed the intersecting lives of 5 characters: a wealthy businessman, a waitress, a social worker, a young runaway, and a man living on the streets. It was a raw, unflinching portrayal of both privilege and poverty, showing how small acts of kindness could ripple outward to create monumental change. The film became a critical and commercial success, earning awards and sparking even more discussions about social responsibility. Meanwhile, high-profile celebrities took note of Johnny's actions and followed suit in their own unique ways. Some, like Emma Watson and Leonardo DiCaprio, hosted public forums on inequality, while others, such as Keanu Reeves and Rihanna, quietly funded shelters and community programs. A-list actors began using their acceptance speeches at award shows to draw attention to pressing social issues, turning glamorous events into platforms for activism. Several months after the Chez Lumière incident, Johnny decided it was time to push the boundaries of his experiment even further. This time, he chose the bustling streets of New York City, where the chasm between wealth and poverty seemed particularly stark. Disguised once again, he set up a makeshift spot near a subway entrance in Midtown Manhattan. He held a simple cardboard sign that read, "A smile goes a long way." For hours, he sat quietly, observing the ceaseless flow of humanity around him. Some people rushed by without a second glance, their eyes glued to their phones or preoccupied with their daily grind. Others spared him a brief look, their expressions flickering between pity and discomfort before quickly looking away. But there were exceptions. A young girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, asking if they could give the nice man a sandwich. An elderly gentleman paused to share a story about how he'd once been down on his luck, but had managed to turn his life around with the help of a stranger's kindness. A street musician nearby struck up a conversation with Johnny, offering to split his earnings from the day. A gesture that deeply moved Johnny, despite the man's meager collection of crumpled bills. In the anonymity of his disguise, Johnny felt more human than he had in years. There was no entourage, no cameras, no curated image to maintain. It was just him, stripped of the layers of fame, connecting with people on the most fundamental level. At the end of the day, he packed up his belongings and donated the few dollars he had received to a nearby shelter. He left with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue his mission of fostering empathy and understanding. As the movement inspired by Johnny's experiment gained traction, educators began to recognize its potential as a teaching tool. Schools across the globe started incorporating the story into their curriculums, using it to spark discussions about compassion, privilege, and the power of small actions. In one Los Angeles high school, students were tasked with designing their own social experiments to challenge stereotypes and foster empathy within their communities. The results were astonishing. One group organized a silent lunch where students sat with peers they didn't know, communicating only through handwritten notes to explore nonverbal connections. Another group launched a kindness jar initiative where students anonymously dropped notes of encouragement and appreciation for their classmates. Teachers observed a noticeable shift in the school's atmosphere as students became more mindful of their interactions and more willing to step outside their comfort zones. Higher education institutions also joined the conversation. Sociology professors used Johnny's experiment as a case study, encouraging students to analyze its implications through various theoretical lenses. Film and media courses examined how the experiment disrupted traditional celebrity culture, while ethics classes debated the morality of using one's privilege to stage social interventions. Johnny's journey also reignited the age-old conversation about the intersection of art and activism. Could art alone inspire lasting social change, or did it need to be accompanied by direct action? This question sparked lively debates among artists, critics, and activists, many of whom pointed to Johnny's experiment as a powerful example of how art, in this case, the art of performance, could break down barriers and ignite dialogue. Theater groups staged reenactments of Johnny's night at Chez Lumiere, infusing them with monologues and audience participation to challenge viewers to confront their own biases. Street artists painted murals depicting scenes of invisible lives, their vibrant works gracing alleyways, abandoned buildings, and subway walls. Musicians wrote songs inspired by the experiment, their lyrics blending raw emotion with calls for unity and compassion. Johnny himself leaned into this intersection, collaborating with various artists to create multimedia projects that highlighted stories of resilience and hope. One of these projects was a short film titled In Their Shoes, which documented a day in the life of individuals experiencing homelessness, from the early morning search for a safe place to sleep to the small victories that kept them going. Narrated by Johnny, the film was both haunting and uplifting, offering a rare glimpse into lives often overlooked. As the global impact of Johnny's actions grew, world leaders began taking notice. At the United Nations, a special summit was convened to address the escalating crisis of homelessness, and Johnny was invited to speak. His presence at the summit was met with both anticipation and skepticism. Could an actor's insights truly contribute to solving such a complex issue? But when Johnny took the stage, his words carried weight. He spoke not as a Hollywood star, but as someone who had witnessed firsthand the quiet dignity and untold struggles of those society often ignored. He shared stories of the people he'd met, from Marcus the architect to the street musician in New York, weaving their experiences into a larger narrative about systemic failures and the need for collective action. The solution isn't just in policies or programs, Johnny told the assembly. It's in how we choose to see one another. We cannot address homelessness without addressing the invisible walls we've built between us. His speech received a standing ovation, and afterward, several world leaders approached him to express their support for Haven and similar initiatives. Discussions began about forming international coalitions to tackle homelessness on a global scale, drawing on the lessons and momentum sparked by Johnny's experiment. Amid all the external changes Johnny helped inspire, the greatest transformation was perhaps the one within himself. For years, he had grappled with the isolating nature of fame, the way it built walls between him and the world. But through his experiments and advocacy, those walls began to crumble. He found himself more connected, more grounded, and more deeply attuned to the beauty and fragility of human connection. Johnny started living more simply, finding joy in small, ordinary moments, a quiet walk through a park, a heartfelt conversation with a friend, the sound of rain against his window. He continued to act, but now his roles were chosen with a clear purpose: to tell stories that mattered, stories that could spark empathy and understanding in those who watched them. His legacy, once defined by iconic characters and box office successes, became something far greater. It was a legacy of compassion, courage, and the unwavering belief that even the smallest act of kindness could change the world. Years later, people still spoke of Johnny Depp's night at Chez Lumiere as a pivotal moment in cultural history. It had planted a seed of awareness that continued to grow, inspiring countless acts of kindness and initiatives for social justice. And though Johnny himself had long since stepped out of the spotlight, his story lived on, a timeless reminder of the transformative power of seeing and truly valuing the humanity in everyone. In the years that followed, Johnny Depp's experiment evolved into more than just a cultural phenomenon. It became a symbol etched into the collective memory of society. People spoke of it as a pivotal turning point, where the barriers between wealth and poverty, fame and obscurity were momentarily dissolved. It served as a reminder of what was possible when humanity chose compassion over judgment. Haven communities multiplied across the globe, becoming a beacon of hope for those seeking a fresh start. Each community carried Johnny's message, fostering environments where respect and opportunity thrived. These spaces became living proof that dignity could be restored through collective effort and kindness. Johnny himself remained a quiet but steadfast advocate. He continued supporting housing initiatives, funding art programs for marginalized groups, and appearing unexpectedly at shelters to sit, listen, and share stories. His presence brought a unique blend of humility and hope, a testament to the transformative power of empathy. Johnny's actions left behind a legacy that transcended the boundaries of film and fame. His journey from Hollywood royalty to an advocate for the invisible illuminated a profound truth: that the world could change, not through grand gestures alone, but through the quiet, persistent choice to care. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on Johnny Depp disguising himself as homeless in a restaurant? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.